Everybody, so we're back for another Azure Engineering Fridays. I've got Cole and Alex Davenport here with me. You guys want to introduce yourself? Cole, go first.
Yeah, cool. I'm an Azure architect here at RSM.
Yep. Alex?
Hey, I'm Alex, also an Azure architect with RSM.
And my name's Thomas Turner. I focus on the security and compliance of the Microsoft ecosystem. So what we want to chat about today is cost savings in Azure. During COVID, during the pandemic, a lot of people hyper-focused and migrated their infrastructure into Azure, migrated certain PaaS and IaaS services into Azure. And calculator, those services can come out to be a certain amount of money, but once those services are in Azure, they can end up costing a lot more. So what I want to do today is pick these guys' brains to figure out what are some simple things that we can do as a CFO, a director of finance, a director of IT, a non-technical role. What can they do to dive into their Azure environment and see some simple cost savings analysis that we could pull out of that Azure tenancy? So who wants to go first?
I can kick us off. There's three really main things that you need to focus about when you're looking at an Azure environment. How to save money quickly and efficiently without really disrupting your users. The three biggest things to focus on are compute, licensing, and storage. Those three things are kind of the biggest and the key parts that run Azure and that kind of Microsoft bills for. The main first one is more or less reserved instances and savings plans. Those are two massive things you do to kind of opt in and say, hey, like I'm using this resource or this amount of resources for a specific amount of time, and I want to continue to use those resources, so I'm going to commit to this usage and be billed monthly or upfront.
So there's two of those. There's the savings plan, and then there's the reserve instances. What's the difference? Why do a savings plans over reserve instances or vice versa?
Reserved instances for individuals that know exactly what they want, right? They've seen this pattern. They know what they're doing. They're like, hey, I know I'm going to use this same D8AS this entire year. I've been using it, the same server SKU. You're committing to that same either app service plan or virtual machine SKU. And the SKU is memory and CPU combined and bundled into one. So you're committing to that exact platform. Versus a savings plan is you're saying, hey, I don't know exactly what I want, but I know I'm going to spend this much per hour in Azure. And so I'm just going to commit saying, hey, like I'm going to pay $5 every hour of every day for my spend. And that would give you a discount within Azure.
So you're saying if I've got an enterprise application that I know I'm going to run in Azure for the next 3 years, and I'm not going to touch the application, it's not going to really grow by CPU and RAM. It'll grow by drive space probably and backups, but CPU and RAM is roughly going to stay the same. That's a reserve instance in my brain. I got an application, it's not changing for 3 years. I want a reserve instance. But if I've got a website and that website may ramp up really heavily during Black Friday and then ramp down and be moderately used for the rest of the year, that's a savings plan?
Correct. Yep. Savings plan, not 100% sure. Reserved instances, but with the whole, what you want and exactly what you're going to need, you're going to save more money. So I can share my screen here real quick, and Azure pricing calculator will kind of show you exactly what you're needing and what you're going. So if you use a D8.
Can you zoom in on that browser?
Yes.
There you go. Perfect. That's perfect.
So let's say you're committing to a D8. It's going to cost you 75 cents an hour. And with savings plans for a 1-year commitment, a 31% discount, and for a reserved instance, a 41%. So that's a 10% jump from one to the other, and something similar from your savings plans, 3 years to reserved instance, right? You get a little bit more of a benefit if you use savings plans and reserved instances.
Because with reserve instances, you're allowing Microsoft to capacity plan for their data centers, so they're willing to give you a bigger discount, I'm assuming. And then do I have to pay it monthly? Can I pay it up front? What's that work? Is there a difference?
There's not really a difference. It's the same.
Okay.
It doesn't change in the pricing calculator. It doesn't really change at all. It's just, hey, if you can do either. There's no real big difference.
Gotcha. Okay, nice. Very cool.
Along with reserved instances and savings plans, for dev environments, we wouldn't really recommend this unless you need those dev environments to run 24/7. This is more for just production environments. If you're not needing it to run 24/7, you would use spot instances or on-off schedules for your virtual machines. That's just kind of getting to know what you need essentially and what needs to be continuously running. A lot of our clients, they don't need to have their dev environment up 24/7, right? You don't need a 24/7 uptime. They need, hey, I need these from Monday through Friday for about 6 hours, right?
Now, doesn't Microsoft have a dev subscription that's cheaper, but there's like no SLAs around it?
Yes, there's no SLAs, and you get around all the licensing. But depending on what you need and what your environment is, it might not be worth it because you also have to pay for a Visio subscription. And so
Oh,
that
gotcha.
subscription is $2,000 a year. So it really depends on your need and what you're going to be using it for. And you have to kind of have that conversation internally to decide, hey, is going for that dev test subscription really worth it? Because you're still
Are we
paying
gonna
for your compute
save that
resources.
Yeah, we're gonna save that $2,000 by moving to that subscription without the SLA, you could say. Okay.
Yeah. Is it worth it? What do we really need?
There you
And
go.
those are really the big key points for the first thing for compute, right? Those are the key things.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
Yeah,
What else you
next,
got?
to continue to kind of keep saving, another focus area is licensing. One aspect is Azure Hybrid Benefit. So by default, when you're running a virtual machine in Azure, you're paying for Windows Server licensing through your Azure subscription. But if you have your own Windows Server or SQL Server licensing with software assurance, you can bring those to Azure to significantly kind of reduce your Azure compute cost.
Okay.
And then
So
second, there's also for database workloads. So we know SQL servers, a lot of times they require high memory, high IOPS, storage requirements, but they don't require much CPU. They don't require many cores. However, the SQL Server licensing, it's built on a per core basis. So Azure has a constrained VP or vCPU SKU to lower your core count, just to optimize your SQL licensing cost. So in
but
terms
now
of
that's
licensing, go ahead.
go for it. Keep going.
I was going to say, in terms of licensing, the Azure Hybrid Benefit alongside the constrained CPU SKUs, that's going to save you a lot of money.
Are those constrained CPU SKUs, is that only for databases that are considered a PaaS service, platform as a service, or can that be applied to virtual machines running SQL workloads?
Yeah, so it would only be for virtual machines with SQL Server running inside of them.
Gotcha. So it doesn't even apply to PaaS services then, like Cosmos database or anything like that?
Correct. Yep, correct.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Nice. All right. What else you guys got?
Alex, quick question for you. Is there a benefit? So let's say, hey, I don't have any licensing right now. Is there a benefit to partnering with a CSP?
Yeah, so if you work with a CSP, typically a CSP buys in bulk, so they can offer Windows Server or SQL Server licensing at a much bigger discount than what you'd pay through for Azure. For example, RSM offers an 8-core for $21 per month, which is significantly less as opposed to paying for it through Azure. So that's another big perk, is purchasing through a CSP.
Okay. Nice.
The third biggest thing to really look for is that storage we talked about earlier on. There's Azure storage accounts, but there's also the disks that these IaaS servers kind of run on. Again, right, you want to use your premium SSD. That's going to be a little more expensive, but that's for your production workloads, right? That's for what you need to have in production. It's Microsoft best practice. They'll give you the best performance, and you don't want your users suffering. But for your dev environments, again, right, you don't always need the biggest and the best. So you can go down to a standard SSD, which is quite a bit cheaper. Or let's say, hey, I'm using this server. It's just kind of sitting around. It really doesn't get touched much, but we need it up and running, and it is important. You can use our standard HDD, right? Give you different performance brackets, and it might not be as good as premium SSD, but depending on your workload, you can take that into account. Most use cases, you want to stick with the premium SSD, but standard HDD or standard SSD are also really nice. And then storage accounts. A lot of times clients move out to Azure and they just keep throwing stuff in a storage account without really thinking, okay, hey, how long do I need this here for? What is it actually doing? Do we actually need to keep it for a long time? What's our retention? Is this the right type of storage account? And so what I mean by right type of storage account is hot, cool, cold, or archival. Each one of those gives you a different pricing range and can be cheaper or more expensive depending on what you're doing. All of those need to be taken into account. And then, like what I talked about earlier, is making sure retention policies are kind of in place, right? You don't, for your blob storage, if you don't need it to be last more than, a month or two or 6 months or 10 years, right? You can all put that into a life cycle retention policy, which will start deleting stuff for you, so that you're not hoarding data that you don't need and costing your company more money.
Gotcha. So what I've heard right now is, if you want to start saving money in Azure, the very first thing you should look at is what are we currently running in Azure? And is that tied to the right resources for the workload? Again, dev test workloads can get much lower end resources that cost a lot cheaper. Production workloads, if we're keeping those workloads in the cloud and they're going to be in the cloud for multiple years, reserve instances. If we're unsure of how much or how many resources we'll need to run certain resources, that's the savings plans, if I'm getting that right. And then also just general house cleaning. Do we need to keep all of this extra data that we're consuming or that's using up space in Azure? Because again, I'm assuming you're just paying for all that information to be stored there and computed in there. So did I miss anything?
I mean, those are kind of your quick wins. When you think about the cloud, you're kind of always evolving and innovating. So as you move away from virtual machines to platform as a service, right, that's another way to save money. Because as you moving away from VMs are expensive. So if you can continue to modernize and go to, for example, an Azure SQL database, that's PaaS, that's going to allow you to save more money in the future. And it's all about eliminating waste, using resources that can auto scale to really optimize your cost.
I would almost argue that moving workloads off of IaaS virtual machines and over to PaaS services could increase the overall workload security posture because you're not having to deal with all of the patch management. You're not having to deal with all of the installed programs, the bloatware, anything like that that's installed on a server and that's related to that GUI operating system. Having it into a PaaS service really limits the amount of code in the attack surface. And then there's a lot of Microsoft best practices around like how to secure each individual PaaS service. And then there's the Defender for Cloud that you can tie on all those PaaS services as well to help kind of monitor that security posture. So, all right, getting off of IaaS and moving over to PaaS for your workloads can save money and increase security if I'm following correctly.
Yeah, and just to add, it's going to reduce the administrative overhead just because you're managing less. Once you go to PaaS, right, you're not worried about antivirus, you're not worried about OS updates because that's all taken care of for you. So that's also kind of a thing you save that you don't really see, just the less administrative overhead.
Mm-hmm. Nice. So now if I'm a CFO or a director of finance and I go and I grab my Azure guy and I say, show me how much money I can save in Azure, where would they go to find that? What's that look like?
So that would be Azure Advisor. Cole, did you want to hop over there and show us what that looks like?
Yes, give me a second. I'll pull that up.
All right, so now you're in the portal. Where did you go? Like, how did I get to this? How'd you get here?
So initially, you log right into portal.azure.com. You'll see this great screen. Go to the very top search bar. Just type in Advisor.
Okay. Easy.
Advisor will pop right up when it'll give you recommendations for a bunch of different items. But right now, we're focusing more on cost. So we'll navigate there. It does show you 3 years right off the bat. So if you're not wanting to commit for 3 years, right, you can change that term. And then it'll also show you what items it can help you with.
But hang on a second. If you go back to that drop-down menu, there were terms 1 and 3 years, and then there was look-back periods. What's the look-back?
Look-back period is how Microsoft is recommending items for you. For 7 days, right, it's only looking back through the data that it collects for 7 days compared to 60 days. So the more you go back, the more accurate you'll get for long-term items that you need to keep around.
So I would I would recommend that you always just switch that over to 60 because that's going to help you kind of get a quarter. So you have your, your backups, your month end close, and then hopefully a quarter close. So you can kind of see like what that Azure virtual machine or that Azure resource is going to look like through the various business life cycles that it goes through.
Yeah, especially if you're to lock into like a reserved instance, I agree. Having that 60-day look back period so that you know for sure which is the right SKU to choose.
Nice. And then you've got what, two recommendations here coming out to about $14,000 of potential savings. Tell me about each of those.
So they're actually both reserved instances, but they're reserved instances in different ways. The first one, you are locking into a specific SKU. You're saying, hey, I want this IaaS virtual machine, and it's going to run this applications, or they can have these users log into it or whatnot, right? You have this IaaS virtual machine, and it's going to be around for X amount of time, 1 or 3 years. I have it set to 1 year, so it's about $1,200. The second one is app services. App services is a PaaS solution that Azure offers, and that's, hey, instead of a specific SKU, you're buying into more or less an app service plan, and this plan is saying, hey, how many services am I getting for SKU wise, for CPU, memory, but it also takes into account IOPS and a bunch of other fun things. A little bit more of a PaaS solution to your normal server. But you can apply reserved instances to more than just virtual machines and app services. It's anything that requires compute. You can get a reserved instance / savings plan for it.
Gotcha. Okay, perfect. What else do you got?
One thing that when you're out here and you're looking at this, you want to go to configuration, right? You want to go out here to virtual machine, VMM right sizing, and you want to click on your subscription, and you really want to say, hey, my look back period is 90 days. This defaults to 7.
Gotcha.
And if it defaults to 7 and you don't actually catch it, you can be like, oh, I can save so much more money. You're going to want to keep that at 90 to 60 days to make sure that you actually get that look back period. But I wouldn't take Microsoft's word for it right off the gate. I would actually go to a virtual machine, go to a resource itself, and look yourself. This will just tell you, hey, where to start looking, but then you have to take that extra step, the deep dive to understand your resources and see, hey, where my actual usage at? What am I doing? And you can see that through the portal as well. You can actually go to virtual machines and you can click on one and you can see in depth, hey, this is how much CPU I'm using. This is how much RAM I'm using. What do I actually need? What can I cut costs on top of this? So that you are 100% certain of what you're changing. Again, you don't want to make any rash decisions, right? You don't want to hurt your users, so I wouldn't just trust Azure.
So Advisor's more of that gut check, that spot check, but it's not the end all be all. There's more things to it that need to be looked at before we actually start pulling triggers and changing settings, is what I'm hearing.
Yes. I would be.
It's a great starting point, that's for sure.
Yep.
Nice. All right. Well, I'm good if you guys are, but if you got something else, let's hear it.
I'm good on my side.
So if a CFO or somebody from finance came into Azure, saw that, and then wanted additional help on it, there's a way to export that Advisor, right?
Yes.
So
yep. You can export all of this out.
Where's that export button at?
So if I go over here and I go back to costs, right? If I want to go to reserved instance, I can click on this app savings plan and I can do download as a CSV or download as a PDF. And if you have more than one recommendation right here, they'll all come in little chunks. Obviously, CVS is more of an Excel file and, PDF is PDF.
Gotcha. If we had anybody who was interested, could they send you that file and you jump on the phone with them and walk through it? Start kind of digging in?
Yep, I'm happy to help, happy to hop on with anybody, happy to walk through anyone with these offerings and what you can do. There's too many clients out there and too many individuals who don't know where to start looking, and we're happy to help.
Awesome. Guys, thank you so much for this time. I really do appreciate it. So
happy to help.
Fantastic.
Awesome.
Thanks, Thomas.
All right, man. Have a good one, everybody. Bye.
Bye.